Hello, everybody, and welcome to this pre-OilComm 2020 webinar called Future Proofing Your Security Programs, sponsored by Waterfall Security Solutions. Hello, my name is Jeffrey Hill. I'm the Conference Director for OilComm. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope we all find you safe and healthy during this challenging time. We have a really fantastic presentation lined up for you today. I was looking over it the past couple of days. This is really one of the most comprehensive cybersecurity presentations I've seen in a long time, so I think you're in for a real treat. Presentation is going to include some common and new misconceptions about cyber defenses, evolving cybersecurity threats, and also a deep dive into how some hardware like unilateral gateways can be used as defense tools, complete with case studies, and we're also going to have an interactive Q&A with you in the audience. So really, really looking forward to this. Before we meet our speaker, I just want to set the stage a little bit about why it's important that we're talking specifically about examining our current thinking with regards to cyber defenses. Cyber attacks on industrial sites and enterprise users, it continues to become more sophisticated with even more serious physical consequences. We're seeing nation-state tools and techniques being incorporated into things like targeted ransomware. It's pretty scary out there. And getting even more sophisticated. And being that this is a pre-OilComm show, we know in the energy sector we've been one of the most active industries in strengthening cyber defenses and staying ahead of the curve. But that stay ahead of the bad guys approach is also at the same time becoming very expensive. And we're seeing gradually more limited effectiveness with this approach over time on its own. So far too many enterprises were making the mistakes of confusing detective measures with preventative ones. So to talk about the current threat environment, how it's evolving, we have Michael Furstenberg. He's Director of Industrial Security for Waterfall Security Solutions. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this chat. I'm looking forward to the Q&A at the end. That's always the best part, when we actually get to talk about what it is you care about, because up until that time, you're just listening to me talk. So please do get your questions submitted, and I promise we'll leave time for them at the end. So my name is Mike Furstenberg. I've got a background in chemical engineering and computer science, so I'm either the engineer who speaks IT, or I'm the IT guy who understands engineering mindsets. I don't know which. Maybe you can tell me at the end of this. Been in industrial security, focused on cybersecurity for about 20 years now. Most of that time with an asset owner, but have made the switch to the vendor side at this point. So in keeping with that, I will give the obligatory vendor slide, and I will keep it to a minimum so we can get to the content. I do work for Waterfall. Waterfall is not new, been around for a while now, almost 15 years, implementations all over the world. It is an Israeli cybersecurity company. I know that's shocking to everybody. That Israel might have cybersecurity technical companies, but geez, shocking. Anyway, we've been in all critical infrastructure sectors, anybody you can name, and yes, oil and gas has historically been one of our larger verticals, so we thank you, and hopefully we can share some useful information here.
Mike, before you continue, can I'm just going to run through how people can submit questions. So just put that thought on pause for a minute. For those of you in the audience, if you want to submit a question for Mike to answer at the end of his presentation, you can do so using the portal at the bottom of your screen. Questions come to us anonymously. Like none of the other attendees can see who you are when you ask a question. They won't even see the question. We are the only ones who can see it. I'm mentioning this specifically because I know how sensitive cybersecurity conversations can be. We'll get to as many of the questions as we can. If we can't answer them all, Mike will reach out to you on an individual basis after the presentation. So submit those questions. We will get to them at the end. And Mike, sorry for the interruption. Go right back into your presentation.
No worries. I appreciate it. And you're absolutely right. The confidentiality will be maintained there. I still question the utility of that confidentiality. We all have this perception, and in many cases, it's reinforced by our external communications departments and governmental affairs departments that we really can't ever publicly say what tools we're using for security or what applications we use for production, because we can't have we can't have them knowing that. They already know. I'm sorry to be the one to burst the bubble here, but whether they got it through open source intelligence or just because, hey, facing facts, you're in this part of the world doing this process, you're using one of these two PLCs, everybody already knows what you're running. So I guess that's the whole point of this presentation, is the fact that we know what we've got to protect. The threats that would compromise our assets are out there, and they know what we have to protect. So what can we do about it? In order to get to that place, we've got to take a quick look at our history. How did we end up here? Why is cybersecurity necessary for production? And, it goes back 25 years at this point when we first started getting our PLCs and RTUs with Ethernet ports and TCP/IP and everything we had been asking for a couple of years, because we needed standard communications. We needed to leverage everything that the IT folks were leveraging in the interests of economies of scale and ease of implementation. We saw Modbus move to Modbus TCP. We asked for all of this. We asked to run the HMI on Windows operating systems, and what we didn't ask for was security for all of that. We were so willing to pay. The Siemens, the Emerson, the ABB of the world, the Rockwells, we wanted to pay them to get those Ethernet ports and the TCP/IP, because that was going to affect our bottom line. But we kind of didn't really know about security at that point, and even if we did, we thought it came with. We didn't realize it was an add-on, and it does require funding. These vendors, they can't just snap their fingers and say, "Hey, it's secure now." I'll dispel that you can't be secure, but we'll get to that later. Anyways, sorry, I do have a habit of going off on tangents. I hope they're entertaining for you. All right. So, since that time, we've been seeing a lot of integration throughout the enterprise. It goes by different names. I finally accepted that IT/OT is an acceptable term. It took me a while. I just accepted it within the last 6 months. But it's common parlance at this point, and whether or not we agree with it, it's the way people are talking today. So IT/OT integration. That's the lay of the land. We're all dealing with it. We've been dealing with it for years, if not decades. And effectively, what is it? Well, it's a way to do business more efficiently. Most of our companies that we're here today, our business is production, exploration and production. And that is what is referred to as OT in today's world. OT can leverage some of the IT tools that are available, the cloud services for long-term data storage and immutable storage and vendor third-party monitoring without having to put somebody on a plane and a helicopter and get them their safety training and keep that up to date. You know, it's the operations visibility for onshore, for corporate, for everybody. The unfortunate reality is, you know, every time we open up a door intended for us to push stuff out, we're also leaving the door open for stuff to come in. The Trojans of the past, the continued denial of service attacks, and of course the targeted and the non-targeted malware. Yeah, they're both out there. Interesting that you mentioned the nation-state attacks during the introduction. It's important to note that the ransomware we're seeing today, even non-targeted ransomware, that was the nation-state attack 2 years ago. It's the same code. You know, it's migrating quickly from cyber warfare, or if you want to call it that, into cyber espionage and cyber crime, cyber business, as it were. And we simply have to recognize that this is an arms race. There is escalation of tactics and abilities. And that's just another reason why we need to make sure that we are investing properly when we look to the cybersecurity of our infrastructure. It's no surprise to anybody, the attacks are on the rise. No matter whose feed you subscribe to, no matter what magazine you read, no matter what government you listen to, they all tell you attacks are on the rise. They are going after the control systems. They are going after production. And they're not going to stop. And it really isn't just the fact that they're rising in number. They are rising in complexity as well. You know, it is rather interesting. You know, just when we look at these heat maps like this. Very, very useful heat maps, but realistically, can I bring this into a management team and show them this graphic and expect that my security budget's going to rise? Probably not. I can't say that I ever had that experience bringing something like this to an executive management team and expecting an increase in budget. So, you know, the question then becomes, what would? Well, here's your answer. The fact is, there is a monetary cost associated with an attack, whether it's downtime, whether it's reputational risk, whether it's environmental, whatever the case, there's a definite cost. A lot of these are on the low side. I heard the CIO from Maersk, and his estimation is that's extraordinarily low for what the attacks actually cost them. And I think everybody's familiar with most of these. The fact here is that even generic ransomware, stuff that's just floating around, it can be devastating financially. We need to recognize that, and we need to be able to reference things like this in order to help us get budget. Now, that's not to say we want to instill fear and despair in our executive management teams, I'd argue that most definitely will never work. But they do need to be aware that we're not doing this just because we should. We're doing this because cybersecurity risk is business risk, and here's the numbers that prove that. So I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into one of these, and it's the Norsk Hydro attack. I think most people are familiar with this. They effectively had to switch to manual operations at facilities where they didn't just out and out shut down. Interestingly enough, while there are claims that this was targeted, it wasn't. In fact, according to the latest studies I've seen by the folks who purport to know the Ponemon Institute's Verizon data breach surveys, etc., 23% of attacks are targeted. That's bad, 23%. The flip side's worse. That means 77% of the attacks were not targeted. You just happen to be there and available and susceptible to the attack. This attack did not go after a vulnerability. It's important to know that as well. There was no patch here that would have resolved this issue and made Norsk Hydro invulnerable to the attack. Effectively, this ransomware took advantage of access. Plain and simple, it could, so it did. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about future-proofing. We have to understand that prevention can be done, but we have to make sure that we're evaluating prevention tools fairly and appropriately. Prevention is not our only choice. We have detection, we have directives as well, policies and standards, procedures, etc. But prevention, that's job one. It's actually conceptually very similar. 50 years ago or so, we started using industrial control systems and automation, basically to operate more efficiently and take away some human error. Well, that's kind of what we need to do from a security perspective as well, and we need to recognize the human error and the efficiency involved in detection as opposed to prevention. It's an important distinction. So when we all started down this journey, when I started down this journey 20 years ago, after getting dragged out of my office into a meeting to start up the cybersecurity team, the security programs office, we looked to conventional security. What do we do for conventional cybersecurity? Well, it's also known as information security. Information, that's data. That's not what we're protecting here when we're talking about production. Our systems are not data. We need protection from the data. The data could be an attack like that ransomware that hit Norsk Hydro. Just a quick reminder, if you've ever heard me in the past, it's not about the data. I don't want to hear about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Can I talk to them in an IT setting? Sure, happy to. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about in production. In production, we're talking about safety and reliability. Keep stuff up, keep it running so the company keeps making money, and do it in the safest way possible. Sure, there's an equipment protection piece to cybersecurity as well. It isn't, always the primary goal of our programs, but that's where we're going. It's an important distinction, and I apologize for once again going off on a little tirade there, but it's an important recognition there. Getting back to conventional cybersecurity, the fact is, when we take into account these goals and the fact that data is not what we're protecting, well, we can clearly see that these IT-style defenses like SD-WAN and firewalls or UTM devices or whatever they're calling them this week, it's basic at best. Really basic level. We need something more advanced if we want to be future-proof. When we take a little bit of a closer look, some of you know me. I spent a lot of time around firewalls before I became a vendor, having responsibility for over 200 industrial facilities. Firewalls are bad. I know. I lived with them for over a decade. Managing them, deploying them, retiring them. It's expensive. It causes a lot of headaches. The key with all of that is that the firewall is assumed, and much like the SD-WAN of today, you have to assume compromise at that point. And that's why we need people watching the IDS systems. Hopefully we catch the bad guys before they really mess stuff up and cause a safety issue or a production outage, unscheduled outage. It's really an interesting concept, to really consider if it's appropriate to rely on this concept. When the systems we're protecting from cyber compromise, they are the systems that are responsible for our health and safety. So it's different. I'm not saying more important. I'm not saying less important than the ERP system. But it's different, and we need to understand if it's appropriate. The fact is, we've got to use appropriate technology, and we've got to use appropriate risk assessment concepts as well. And I'm going to talk more on that in a minute. So real quickly, this is just another presentation from the past. Encourage you to Google 13 ways through a firewall. There's and that's 7 years old at this point. There's more ways today, and it keeps getting more and more. We have to recognize that a firewall is software. It's an operating system. It's an access list. It's a user-programmed filter, and all of that can have errors. One of these days, I'm going to tell people where that picture was taken. Today's not the day, in case you were hoping it was, but one of these days, that picture, for anybody who's seen it before and thinks that, oh, that's not real. I was there when that picture was taken in 2006. That's a real picture at a real place, and that just shows you the best of intentions. Just like the firewall, the best of intentions, but there's a hole here. So I did promise to talk more about risk assessments, because realistically, this is what it's all about. We can talk about cybersecurity all we want. We can talk about production cybersecurity, and at the end of the day, it's risk. And calculating risk is complex. But we have to work from risk because that's the language that our businesses speak in. It's what they understand. So, this picture is another one from the past. I still love this picture. If you look at it closely, you can see we're talking about a shower stall with a tub spout. So I've asked people, why is that tub spout there? I didn't ask at that hotel, but I should have. I've heard a couple of theories, that ranging from, it's local code. They say if you install a shower valve, it has to have a tub spout, this, that, the other thing. Others have told me it's about space and storage, or maybe they ordered the wrong stuff, and then somebody said, it's there to wash your feet. And that's not true. What I think happened here, the plumber said, whenever we install a shower, we install a tub spout. We've always done it that way. So that's the way we're going to do it. And this is the way we've always assessed risk. Threat and vulnerability, likelihood and consequence. It works in IT world. It works when we're talking about data. And then we put all of that into a red, yellow, green TLP if we can't do it quantitatively. The reality of production cybersecurity, of automation cybersecurity, it's different. We talked about it earlier on a cursory basis that nobody's talking about what they've got. We have no idea what the likelihood is. I've heard different people issue different ways to think about it. The likelihood's always one because eventually everybody gets compromised. And vulnerability, if I reduce my vulnerabilities to zero, then I have no risk. So life is good. And then the counter argument gets blasted out there. Well, you can't reduce your vulnerabilities to zero because there's always vulnerabilities in the code, whether or not they've been discovered, reported, and have a patch available, and you've tested and applied the patch is something entirely different. Now, long story short, I think this is a flawed calculation in terms of how we look to talk about risk in the enterprise, because none of it's in our control. The threat, the vulnerability, the likelihood, none of that's in our control. All we can control is the exposure. We have a little bit of control over the cost of an incident, of the consequence, but that's not helping us in the overall equation. We've got to try something different. I'd encourage you to look at things like some older presentations like How Much Is Enough or the Top 20 Attacks, things of that nature, where we can really get into it. So I do want to get into some common misconceptions here. And I don't mean common as in these are the ones found most often, although that's also true. What I meant by common misconceptions here was they're shared between control system security and IT security, and in some cases physical security as well. You need to look at these and be prepared to issue the proper, truthful counter argument if somebody is trying to steal your budget based on one of these common misconceptions. The outrun the bear thing. I thought this was over and done with. I thought this was done 5 years ago, where people were actually standing up in front of people saying, cybersecurity, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. I just have to have better cybersecurity than my competitor or the other guy down the street or across the Gulf. No. That assumes a couple things. That assumes, first of all, that there's only one bear. And it also assumes that the bear doesn't want you for whatever reason. Unfortunately, there are still people out there today. Well, not today, but last week I heard a webinar with a respected PhD in cybersecurity actively saying, I just have to outrun the bear. I almost fell off my chair when I heard that. The world's full of bears. We're not going to outrun all of them. We've got to do what's right, not just be better than our competitor. So, we talked about the whole I'm not a target. 77% of the ransomware that was successful wasn't aimed at a specific target. So, these are what we've got to consider, and hopefully we're getting somewhere as a community. I think we're getting more consistent with the messaging that we're going to our management teams with, so that we're not saying these things and we're not using flawed logic from the past anymore. We're seeing reality and business risk, and the combination is powerful. So real quickly, I do want to talk about this. This is what I refer to as the IT security playbook. And it's important to note there is no silver bullet in here, in this list. And sometimes the titles might change. But the reality is everybody's operating from this playbook or some facsimile thereof. And you can't pick one, or even one from each column, and say, that's good, I'm secure, I'm going home, I'm going to sleep. First of all, security doesn't work that way. It's not actually possible to be secure. That's something else we have to recognize, that we can be more secure than we are currently, and we could also be less secure than we are currently, or we could maintain our security posture, but one cannot be secure. I am often astounded when I hear consultants and integrators saying, we'll secure your systems. Okay, what does that mean? What are you going to do? Or a vendor saying, buy our secure software. How is it secure? Tell me what is it doing that is, in your words, secure. I'm ready and willing to accept that it's more secure than it used to be, even that it might be highly secure. But secure in an absolute term, well, that's a sales and marketing term. It's not a actual reality. And once again, I've gone down the rabbit hole, and sorry, tangents will happen. Your mileage may vary. The current, we've got to move on to think about the current environment, and it's just the facts. For this, the easiest way to get the whole reading on this is Google Andrew Ginter, 3 Laws of SCADA Security. But in short, nothing is secure. All software has mistakes. Some of those mistakes are going to be security bugs, and so all software can be hacked. And of course, cyber attacks are information. They are data, and therefore every bit of data could have the potential to be an attack. And that's really what we're here to prevent. We're here to prevent bad data from hitting, bad data in the form of a threat from hitting one of the bugs, our vulnerabilities in our production world. That's why we exist. So it's important to think about what we're protecting. I talked about this briefly earlier. The current buzzword is consequence-driven engineering. I talked about it differently. You can, if you want, you can Google another presentation from the past when, back in 2014, I started talking about target-based security. The fact is, we look at this picture and we see our infrastructure, we see our systems. That's not what everybody sees. Others might see that and look at that picture and say, that's my target. So we've got to recognize that and think about things from a different perspective. It's not just about the fact that our cybersecurity goals of continuous, correct, efficient operations, equipment protection, operating in a safe and reliable manner. Our cybersecurity goals are different than our InfoSec goals. It's also a fundamental shift in our thinking that requires us to consider the fact that, someday somebody might try to misuse or abuse our systems, rather than, the old 20-year ago thinking, well, when we used to say, yeah, that could happen, but why would anybody want to do that? I think we know better today. So I think I want to jump into a couple of these case studies, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on them, but the key here is, that we're focusing on prevention. We're focusing on prevention that's going to work, and is going to work long term. So in this first case study, there was a need to create connectivity to the system, E&P, that was required for reliability monitoring and also for third-party support and operational efficiency, all the things we talked about earlier. It's an offshore network, and there was a risk assessment. So the risk analysis concluded that, given the need to connect the automation systems to the corporate systems, which are always connected to the internet, the risk assessment actually said no IT security mechanisms could assure maintaining the safety of the environment. So this particular group, and once again, I know we're all terrified that somebody else is going to know who did what or what we have. I assure you, I'm not going to be the one to mention this company's name. Most of you probably know anyway. With that said, they're using a unidirectional security gateway. They're using operational security technology instead of IT security. They're protecting a process instead of data. They put in place a unidirectional security gateway to replicate OPC. Got the OPC data out of the process network, out of production, into the IT corporate space, into a platform Pi server, which could then be coordinated with corporate for everything they needed in terms of usage and forecasting, and also could be shared with iHistorian for all of the monitoring that was required. And of course, they added remote screen view for secure remote access. More secure remote access, I should say. Caught myself. So real quick, for those who aren't aware of the unidirectional security gateway, even though it's been around for a while, the fact is it's one of the best kept secrets in industrial cybersecurity. And the way it works it's elegant in its simplicity. It's both hardware and software. The hardware gives us the security, and the software ensures the visibility and the disciplined control. The security is hardware-based. It's not software like a firewall. The connection between the production side, which we call the transmit, and the corporate side, in this case the receive, that's a fiber optic cable. And the fiber card on the transmit side has, as you would expect, only a laser, no optical receiver. And of course, on the receive side, the opposite's true. Has a photocell, no light source. So physically, data can only move in one direction. Now, obviously, with TCP/IP, everything's bidirectional. So this is where our software comes into play, because how do you make two-way communications work over a one-way interface? Well, that's what our software does. Our software gathers the data from a production source, like an OPC server in this particular case study, strips out all of the headers and all of the information that's identifying, sends just the data, the tag names, the values, timestamps. That goes across the one-way hardware to the receive agent, which then populates all of that data to a replica server. And anybody who's not on the production network, who needs data from the production network, gets it from that replica server. They're getting real-time data, less than a second old. They're getting all the historical data they can eat. Life is good, but nothing, no virus, no ransomware, whatever got loose on the corporate network, because it's a one-way interface. There's no path back in to the control system. So real quick, another case study, very similar in nature, but also a desire to leverage some cloud-based analytics, some industrial Internet of Things deployment type stuff. They did use a gateway, very much like the case study, the first case study we looked at. Replicate all of the production data, get it to the control system as needed. Get it to the corporate systems as needed. But they also put in place a unidirectional cloud connect to effectively publish all of this information that was necessary for the new platform from the critical network to, in this case, Microsoft Azure environment over one-way hardware. It once again comes back to money. This was a significant savings for them in terms of optimization, process optimization, because it gave them the ability to do predictive maintenance with all of the buzzwords you'd expect to hear right now with big data and machine processing. So there's the fun there. So the unidirectional cloud connect, similar to the unidirectional gateway. The general difference is that the connection external is going to be unified data out to a cloud environment, whether it's Microsoft Azure, AWS, whoever needs it, wherever needs it, that's where it goes, and it's still one-way hardware. Data gets collected and sent out via the one-way hardware, replicated to where it needs to go. So that's really the case studies. Hopefully this was interesting. If you want to hear some other really good stuff, we do have a free podcast. It's not about waterfall. It's about industrial security, specifically industrial cybersecurity. Check this out on your favorite podcast app. It's growing. It's actually over 30,000 downloads per episode at this point. So it's definitely worthwhile if you've got an interest in learning more from experts from all kinds of different companies all over the world, all kinds of regulators everywhere. Additionally, for everybody here today, we do have an ebook that we want to make available to everybody. It's available on our website. It's a free download. It's about industrial security in our world. This is what we do. I'd love to hear comments, love to hear feedback about what you see, what you read. It's a good way to get that introduction. My email address is there at the bottom of this slide. Please do get me feedback. I always love to hear what we're doing right, but I really, really love to hear what we're doing wrong. I love negative feedback. Negative feedback leads to process improvement. We've known that for millennia, so let me know what we're doing wrong so it can be made right. With that said, hopefully I've left some time for questions, and I want to thank everybody for sticking with me through all of my tangents and tirades.
Thank you so much, Mike. Yes, we do have a few questions, and for those of you who have questions you want to ask, now is the time. Please submit those through the portal at the bottom of the screen. We're going to try to get as many as we can in the next 10 minutes or so here that we have left. If we don't get to your question, as I said, we'll have Mike reach out to you afterward. Mike, I do want to kind of wrap a few questions that came into one. And everybody's basically asking, how do we secure home networks with everybody telecommuting? And do you have any specific advice for work at home networks, and also like securing home networks through things like MS Teams? Any specific thoughts or observations you want to give regarding expanded home network use right now?
Well, I'm going to stay away from making any product recommendations or mentioning any product names or collaboration tools such as the ones you mentioned. Realistically, it's still the business's risk, regardless of whose network I happen to be working on. So the business, the company has to make the decisions, not Mike Furstenberg. I can sit here and say my home network is great, except the company that I'm connecting to really needs to verify a lot before they should let me connect. They need to verify, number one, that I am Mike Furstenberg. Number two, that the computer that I'm using is in fact a computer that I should be using. Number three, that it's patched and running current antivirus and up to date on everything it should be up to date on. And there's all kinds of products and solutions out there for things of this nature. But once again, it comes back to the risk. If we're talking about accessing email, if we're talking about accessing Excel spreadsheets from a remote office, from a hotel, from somebody's basement, that's entirely different than accessing production facilities remotely. Sometimes we need to correlate our thinking to the world of physical security because, well, quite frankly, industrial cybersecurity has a lot in common with physical security. And the fact is there's a lot of hurdles to clear before somebody sits down in a chair in a control room. we've got to make sure that we implement similar hurdles on the cybersecurity side. Just as a brief example, about 5 years ago, I was at a facility. I'm not even going to mention what vertical. I'm surely not going to mention what continent it was. But I pulled up to the facility about 25 miles outside of the nearest city. And there was literally a 20-foot chain link fence with 6 strands of barbed wire running around the entire facility. There was a gate. I went to the gate. There was a guard. He had a gun. That's the way it was. You know, I presented my passport to show who I was. They called. They verified that I was supposed to be there that day, so they opened the gate for me, and I drove through a bunch of Jersey barriers so that I didn't get up to ramming speed, and then I parked and I walked in, and they authenticated me again at the front desk by somebody else who had a gun. And then, because it was escorted access only, the engineer I was meeting with came out and escorted me into the facility through a man trap, actually, which is still one of a handful. They're not commonly found in nature. So all this happens, and we finally sit down and we get to talking. And 2 minutes into the conversation, this engineer gets a phone call and says, "Okay, I can make that change for you right here." Pulls out the iPhone, puts in a 4-digit PIN, and changes a value. That is not similar. We've got to make sure our cybersecurity matches with our physical security. When we have strong physical security like that, and cybersecurity is a 4-digit code, well, we're encouraging people to attack us over cyber, and we can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question here is, Michael, you were talking about the unidirectional gateways. What happens when a hostile cyber attack happens on a network equipped with a unidirectional gateway? Would both the user and the hacker experience?
Good question. Good question. So I'll take that from a couple of different perspectives. Actually, the first, let's say, assume that the ransomware or the motivated attacker was on the corporate network. They're on our IT network. Why are we assuming that? Well, number one, that's the assumption that IT security is making, but also I think it's the assumption that this particular question is making. So we've got an attacker or ransomware or self-replicating malware somewhere on our corporate network. The reality is, what are they going to see if that's an attacker? Let's say it's a motivated attacker. They're doing low and slow scans. They're doing some sort of Nmap scan to try to find whatever they can find. If there's a firewall protection, well, they're going to find the firewall. And they're going to see the firewall, and they're going to identify the firewall operating system, make, model, etc., using tools like P0F. All of this stuff's free, by the way. They'll use something like Firewalk, and they'll go through the firewall, and poof, instant control system access. In fact, you ask your favorite pen tester what they do, they'll tell you that story. So how's it different with the unidirectional security gateway at that point? Well, for starters, the unidirectional security gateway, the interfaces don't have IP addresses. So you're not going to find them over the network. It's not just a physical break, it's a protocol break as well. It's logical protection in addition to the physical protection. So the attacker's not going to see that there is another network the way they would with a firewall. Similarly, the ransomware is not going to be able to get in because there is no physical network path in. Could the ransomware or the attacker take down the replica server? Sure, absolutely they could, because that exists on the corporate network. But the reality is that's where our IT security folks, they shine. They are going to enact their incident response. They're going to go through, they're prepared. They know what they're doing. They're going to do what they have to do to get that back. And meanwhile, the whole time that's happening, the production facility continues to operate behind the unidirectional security gateway, because that replica server was just that. It was a replica server. And when the virus is contained and eradicated and you move into the recovery phase, or the ransomware or the attacker, you're into recovery. The data exists in production, and it's just a matter of bringing it out to getting it back out to the replica server. As I've heard it described, that's where you count the money on the corporate network. If you can't count the money today and you have to wait till tomorrow to count the money, that's okay, as long as you're still making the money on the production network today. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and we want to get one question here real quick before the end. Mike, is it possible to see a threat evolving and to track the progress of penetration and the path in real time and maybe get data from that attack?
Not sure. I couldn't quite hear you there.
Okay, I was saying, is it possible to see a threat evolving and to track the progress of a penetration or network breach in real time and to gather data from it? So
wow.
real-time monitoring on a cyber threat.
So ordinarily, I'll say right at the beginning of when I start speaking, I've spent most of my life in plant environments and production environments. So ordinarily, you're going to hear some colorful metaphors escape my lips over the course of the time we spend together. And I caught myself before I said it this time, so I'm really proud. But you got some. It's a big risk there to say, we know what you're going to do better than what you know. For me to sit here as a defender and say, not only can I bet that I'm going to see you, I'm going to bet that I can present something false to you and watch your tactics. I'm going to bet that you'll never find the real systems, and even if you do, I'll be able to kick you out. I liken this, once again, I go back to the physical security equation, where we've got to be similar in our nature. From a physical security perspective, we wouldn't let somebody walk into our production off the street. Obviously, in many of our cases, that's not possible, but we wouldn't let them walk into the production control room, sit down, and be there. That's just not going to happen. That's not acceptable. So why would we even claim that it's acceptable when it's on the cyber side? It's the same concept. It's not acceptable. Furthermore, we'd be wrong to bet that we can do exactly what you said we're going to do. The average time from the contamination until the detection is still, depending on whose studies you believe, anywhere from 4 to 8 months. That means the attacker is sitting in the control room for 4 to 8 months before we even know they're there. Mind you, we still haven't done anything about it. We're talking about another average of 6 months before they're eradicated from our network, and another 2 months for recovery. So now we're up to 1.5 years of potential downtime, lost production, possible safety issues, simply because we thought that we'd see them before they did anything bad. I'm not willing to take that bet personally.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I wish we could have more questions. We're just about out of time. As I said, we did have a few questions left here, and Mike will reach out to you individually to respond to those. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you to our sponsor, Waterfall Security. The next OilComm webcast will be with Justin Wallace from Huntsman and Rick Sparandio from Rigstar. We're going to be talking about 5G, 4G LTE private networks. And then these webcasts and webinars lead up to our big event, OilComm, which is October 14th and 15th out of Houston. So if you want more information about the program and speakers we have scheduled, you can visit www.oilcomm.com. Once again, my name is Jeffrey Hill, Conference Director for OilComm. We've been listening to Mike Furstenberg. Mike, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and hopefully I didn't go off on too many tangents.
Nope, it was great. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you soon.